users get most of the equity in crypto. 80% of a company's equity goes to the users. That's the future. We shouldn't be building companies anymore. We should be building DAOs. Crypto is the first credible competition to Silicon Valley.
I guess I'll do a quick intro for everyone. Like, Prasanna is probably one of the best entrepreneurs I know. You've done it like multiple times. You've had massive failures, massive successes. I think you know the whole gamut. You've gone from 0 to like 1 to like 100 in startups. Harshith was extremely excited to have you on. There's a lot of people who view you as like a icon in some senses. I mean, we know each other as friends, so I we've been through the ups and downs together. This could be kind of a podcast about like your journey, but also the theory behind building a startup that like would work now that you've done it so many times. But also we can go into crypto. Harshith has a lot of questions about crypto. I guess to start, Prasanna, like you did rippling and you stepped back from that and you started to dip your toe in crypto. I remember talking to you like almost a year or 2 years ago about your newer idea in crypto, which was more like I would just say like a very high level crypto wallet. Maybe you could pitch it the way you want, but like that was like your next journey. Tell me, why even do it again? Why not just take a break from startups and walk away?
I mean, I did try for many years. Actually, I didn't do anything. And then you get bored. Like there's only so many beaches or mountains you can go visit. And there is only so much time you can even spend with your son. He gets bored. Ultimately, you sort of see, you want to sort of contribute something back to the world again. And you want to get curious again, fall in love again. And then you also sort of see, okay, we are like extremely blessed that we have the powers to like move this world around. We're able to press in some spot and amplify something, and like we sort of understand bigger picture connections of how the world works, and like you can press some buttons that change the world, and sometimes you sort of see the butterfly flaps that can turn into tornadoes, and it's hard to resist.
I guess like when you started to like move away from rippling and like start to like think about like just your personal life, what was good about stepping away? Like, I feel like startups are all encompassing and they take almost your life away as like a human being, but like you walked away from startups for a little bit. What did you do that was like one of the more fun things?
When I sort of stepped away from rippling, it was during the COVID days. So when we all had work from home, right? As a founder, you're just like of a hyper growth company, you're just like in a stream of like escalations all the time, right? Especially if you're sitting, I used to go to my office and like sit there, and there would be like a line of people waiting to talk to me, and each one has like a pressing problem that they have to talk to me. Like that's why they're there, right? And then there is like a line, and I remember like my lunch would be like, I would pick up the ice cream tub from the rippling fridge, and like I would just be having lunch and like handling the escalation. That was my life. As a founder, you kind of like understand like how much fun it is, and also like how much like you feel nothing when you do that, right? Like at the end of the day, when you go home and sleep in the night, you feel like both extraordinarily content and satisfied, and like that was a lot of work, but that is good. But then the thing was, there were two things that like ultimately led me to like step out. And like first of all, like the COVID is one which you're sitting at home, suddenly there is no line, no one can sort of stand in a line to like come talk to me. Then you sort of like get more time to reflect and like ask, okay, what do I want to do with my life? First thing is like I kind of realized, okay, Parker, my co-founder, who I deeply respect, he's building his life's work, and rippling is his painting, and he cares about every sort of little detail about that painting in ways that I frankly don't. I cared a lot about the engineering of it, but I sort of realized like, there is a higher order bit that you could care about. And like, Parker is like, does care about it, and it's his life's work. And I wanted to find what mine is. And then I was also frankly tired, man. I wanted to take a break and like do nothing for a little bit. Honestly thought I might be done, but after you get bored, you think you're wrong. I've been doing startups for 15 years now, and between startups, I've always had like long breaks where I just like think and 100% believe I'm done. No more startups for me. But it, turns out to be wrong.
But I guess like rippling, it sounds like you put a lot of time into that, and like people kind of integrate their whole life into like their startup, meaning it becomes your identity.
Yeah.
Like, it sounds like it wasn't for you, but it was, but it wasn't. Most founders can't part ways. Like, when it's that successful, it's so hard.
Absolutely. So look, it was definitely a part of my identity, like a big part of it. I built basically the entire engineering team. I knew everyone. I recruited everyone. I sort of sold everyone. It was definitely a big part of my identity. And I had like a lot of contrarian thesis and beliefs about the world that I expressed through this vehicle. For example, we were the first to sort of believe like an engineering office in India was a good idea, right? I've been having the thesis for a long time and I expressed it at scale. Like I literally like raised compensation in India. I sort of raised it. There were like lots of theses like that. I was able to express at scale and it was my vehicle for change, right? It was a big part of my identity. I think there were things that I just wasn't good at or me and Parker didn't align, especially on 1 to N versus the 0 to 1. I ran things too hot and like Rippling is the kind of company that you probably shouldn't run too hot, like the payroll system and stuff. You kind of want to run it very sort of polished missionary. But, I sort of drove it like a Ferrari car at on a racetrack, which is my style, which is what I'm really good at. And I'm really good at driving that Ferrari car on a racetrack and not hitting the sides. But I do like touch the sides a bit while driving it. I wasn't sort of experienced enough to like understand how to sort of like to deal with the challenges that come from driving it at scale. I learned a lot from that episode as well. At some point when you sort of like have some friction, you kind of feel like, is there like a new painting where I'm really good at, like which feels more like home?
I mean, you're a true startup guy. So like you just wanted to build it fast and furious and get it as good as possible. And like blaze a trail, doing whatever it takes to get it to that point. That is really important in a startup. I hate to say it, like every startup dies if they don't keep that desire, right? So like you need that part in the company. If you don't have that, like you die. Like, I don't know, like so many companies just fade away because they lose that desire to innovate like fast. So like it is sad that you're not there because I do feel like innovation is so important and the founder leaving is like important. But it also sounds like it wasn't your DNA. Maybe were you integrated into your first startup like again, everyone on the podcast, you had another startup like a little. Was your personality integrated into that startup more? Was it harder to leave this one or that one? I guess that's a really crazy question because it seems like you've come to terms with leaving Rippling, but it's like I'd love to just like know your thought process in that.
No, just to be clear, Parker moves really fast as well.
Yeah. Yes.
Like he drives a lot of urgency in the company. He also rightfully has a lot of fears and low tolerance of errors. And like you kind of need to balance that for a company like Rippling. And it's just like my balance line and his balance line started to diverge. And I was not mature enough to like know that at the time and like find how to handle it. I was like pretty locked in on my beliefs of how to run a company. And, it was scary for Parker. To be fair, like what he said was, look, these parts of the company, like, need to run a lot slower. Why don't you go do another 0 to 1? Like go like expand Rippling internationally or something where it'll be like truly 0 to 1, which is what I was considering when I went back home for COVID. And then, plans changed. So I'm like still bullish on Rippling. Like, most of my liquid net worth is still like entirely Rippling. It moves really fast for the enterprise SaaS space in a extremely sleepy space,
It's always fun to see like hyper success, but it's always interesting to see when a founder leaves. Like it's fun to see like where you're going in your journey and like what's next. I guess like you moved on and then you like took a break, but then I remember you're like, I have a small engineering team and we're doing something cool. And, it's been a long time since we spoke and like that product has like evolved a lot, that new company. Let's go into crypto a little bit and just talk about like, you branched out a lot into like different areas, a lot. It's interesting to like hear your thought process on like what the future is and, is it crypto? Is it AI? Like, but yeah.
I think for me, like, what I noticed while I was like working at Rippling and like when COVID was happening was there was fundamentally the way we build companies has like drastically changed. You and I are big beneficiaries of the way we build companies changing. It's like Y Combinator working where hackers, and like nerds can sort of build companies versus exec at like a mature company. And, internet being cheaper and cheaper to like found companies on. And this whole wave, we sort of, YC had a huge product market fit and it produced like trillions of dollars of value. And you and I and like Sama and like our friends Gary and whoever, right, like, are big beneficiaries of it. And we were able to corner large parts of the internet real estate, which turned out to be very valuable, which turned out to be growing a lot. Somewhere around, the COVID time, I sort of realized it has once again changed. It's just not obvious to everyone yet with crypto. The new way of building companies is actually like a DAO, what people call a DAO, like a decentralized autonomous organization. It's the new LLC. It is like one of the most significant human societal organization changes since the LLC and perhaps since YC. It was like extremely obvious to me that like that's the future. We shouldn't be building companies anymore. We should be building DAOs. The first disruption with crypto was money. Like crypto sort of invented like a distributed database, and like Satoshi, the founder, was smart enough to understand that the first use case was money. I bought my first Bitcoin somewhere during my like little days in 2010, and the thesis of crypto as money has played out. It's now worth like 4 trillion. It's like the last leg. But like when I bought it in like 2012, at that time it was obvious to me that crypto was the future of money. I put like half my liquid net worth into like Bitcoin at that time. Like we as entrepreneurs need to be like that ahead, to catch like an early exponential trend in its infancy. But what I realized when I left Rippling was like, actually, there is a second wave that crypto is going through, as like crypto is the future of the internet. Every internet application will be default decentralized versus default centralized. And crypto is the financial rails of the internet. It's an open API on top of which anyone can build things. And it is the Linux of the internet money, where it's open, programmable, and you build apps on top of it. Like every app that you use, like be it Twitter, Facebook, Uber, Airbnb, they'll all be on like crypto rails. They'll be decentralized autonomous organizations. The founders won't really have that much control. Like, code is law. Once code is deployed, people don't change take rates. Like, others can build freely on top of your code. People can sort of build an app for Uber which says what time should he drive in, or like people will build pricing algorithms for like a rider to sort of make a bid for his ride, or a driver to make a bid for his like time. It'll be open, programmable, and most importantly, capitalism, or like building a startup or like creating wealth essentially is like a Ponzi scheme where you convince people to like, believe in your vision. And if everyone believes in your vision becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy and a reality. And you do that by demonstrating momentum across all the stakeholders. So in case of Uber, it's like drivers, riders, investors, press, all these people. You just convince them in a recursive cyclic manner, right? And crypto is like taking that consensus building and financializing it 24/7. Like in apps in crypto, let's take Uniswap for example. What they do is it is on chain, so everyone sort of like agrees on the same time. Like it's multiple like Uniswap is an exchange. There is a trader, there is a market maker, there is a shareholder. You can see like how if all of them believe in Uniswap, it just becomes true very, very, very quickly. And it happens at the speed of light, because internet is something that we've connected our brains at the speed of light, versus the old way of you and I building companies where we sort of go to Sand Hill Road and like pitch a bunch of venture capitalists. Here, like, a random optimistic guy on his basement in Japan or South Korea is like speculating on the token of Uniswap, and the price of the token is going up. And, that is causing, its users to get more and more of its equity. It used to be investors kept most of the equity, like YC changed it, and founders kept most of the equity. And crypto is changing it, buddy. Users get most of the equity in crypto. 80% of a company's equity goes to the users. So in the end state, like, a company is mostly owned by the users. Twitter will mostly be owned by its users. Uber will mostly be owned by its users. And specifically the users who are like early and who sort of like spread the word a lot, who believe a lot, like, end up, or like add value to the network a lot, end up keeping most of the equity in a company like Uniswap or like Uber, or things like that. Capitalism is something where like you and I agree on the future with price of things. Like a price of a company is like, we both agree Tesla is the future, and like price of Tesla sort of forward projects it. And similarly on Uniswap, it sort of, in Web3, this consensus building happens at the speed of light, and instantly the new reality. Like it took Uniswap perhaps like 18 to 24 months to like, become one of the top exchanges in the world, like top 20 exchanges in the world. So, I sort of saw that there is the next big important disruption is like, the way we're building companies are going to completely change, has already changed. It's just not evenly distributed, right? And that's the new company, and the internet is going to be rewritten, and I wanted to participate in it.
So one follow-up question, Prasanna, that I have is about airdrops, right? When you say it's actually owned by the users, and it definitely is. So, just to give some context, I actually was able to even get my MacBook because of the Wormhole airdrop, right? Because I contributed to Wormhole. I was only able to, swap from Phantom wallet to my ETH wallet on MetaMask. And then just because I bridged it using Wormhole, Wormhole was able to reward me with an airdrop. So just want to know your thoughts on this as well. But there's also another side of crypto as well, right, on Twitter, because meme coins are heavily based on distribution. The more distribution that you get, the more incentive you have to just, keep saying when moon and just keep going on Twitter. So that's the other side of Twitter as well. So and it's actually fun side of Twitter because there's a lot of mematics at play as well, because I'm actually a beta tester, beta user of 0x people. So I've started using 0x people since the early days. So I know a lot of all the .eth friends who were there who started off working, and a lot of folks in Bangalore as well. So it's what was super cool was you can just put in the address and then it shows you the entire wallet activity of the user. And it's just pretty cool. So how do you think, the airdrop activity, just seeing what your friends are doing, just tracking wallets and looking at the total volume transacted, right? That and even checking the net worth of a certain wallet. How do you think all of these things play a role, in social fi on crypto?
Got it. So maybe let me sort of start off with like what is 0x people, why we are building it, and what have we learned, since the last time we spoke. We start off 0x people with the belief that future of social is decentralized and on-chain. And we could sort of if you could first penetrate the crypto users and get them, build a big social community, and like eventually as the market grows, the rest of the world will follow. That has, and specifically the thesis was, people would follow their friends, they'll follow their trades and like talk about their trades and like, talk about the new products. And that's how people will discover the new products. And, from that, we could build this community, bootstrap this community and solve this chicken and egg problem, wherein you can follow someone even if they're not on 0x people, because, we've built this gigantic index of people's ENS or social profiles and like their wallet addresses, right? Even if, Vitalik is not on my app, you can still follow him, Vitalik Buterin, the founder of Ethereum, just because, you know his ENS, right? So that was the original thesis, to bootstrap a social network. You start off with like a single player mode where users can come in, get benefits right away. Even if Vitalik is not on my app, you can still follow him. And, for that, we built a gigantic index. We still have like the biggest indexes in crypto, terabytes and terabytes of data. We index every blockchain out there. To make sense of it, we use LLMs to like take a stack trace and like tell you in simple plain English what Vitalik is doing, instead of like showing him, he's calling this blockchain function, this function call or whatever. We just like abstract all of that stuff out. This is something that we've been trying to make it work for like 12 to 18 months. And, we realized it wasn't working. Specifically what we learned was some of this is product of the bear markets or whatever, right? Like basically what we didn't find interesting, even ourselves, was like, what is my friend doing on chain? Like every single sort of transaction of it. First of all, there wasn't a ton of it. And even then, like, often when people are doing it, it was sort of pretty mundane. But then there was a part of it that we found was like actually quite interesting, which is if like a lot of my friends are doing something, that was really interesting. And especially if that thing is new, it has like never been done before. It could be like a new airdrop is coming up, or a new app is Web3 app is trending, or it could be a new token is trending. So that stuff was like actually interesting, which is something that I enjoyed. In the new incarnation of 0x People 2.0, that is like a big part of it, like the trending. We're able to sort of see the anomalies in our index, like in our gigantic crypto index, and say, okay, this is something that's new. Like there's a new protocol, there's a new app that's coming up, there's a new token that's coming up. And these are your friends who are actually doing this stuff. And you can go buy that token if you would like, or, I'll give you a link to the protocol. You can go try and use it. And then we sort of like double down and even sort of like asked LLMs to identify why is this trending. And LLMs have gotten really good that they're able to like find the exact news or tweets, set of tweets, like who are the big actors, what are they saying about it, which is causing this stuff to trend. So that is one of the big learnings. We sort of took the social feed and took out the noise and like took out the core bit of it that was actually working, which is the trending. And like, we've doubled down and like made a polished product out of it. We poured a lot of energy sort of like doubling down on it. The other thing that turned out to be like extremely useful was portfolio product. So, out of this gigantic index, what we saw users were using a lot, they found a lot of value as the portfolio product. In retrospect, it makes a lot of sense. First of all, it's a single player product. People want to see their portfolio or like maybe some other people's portfolios. And then there was just no one sort of, and it was a worsening problem because the future of crypto is obviously like tons and tons of blockchains. So someone needs to go index all these blockchains. Otherwise, like users' money is like split across these blockchains. And anytime a new blockchain comes and you try it out, your money gets lost, right? You leave a bunch of it in this new blockchain and you don't remember, right? And then the same thing also inside of apps. Anytime a new app or a protocol shows up and you try it out, like Polymarket, which is the crypto prediction market, or like Hyperliquid, which is a crypto derivatives market, right? Every crypto app like requires money to use, right? We're the financial rails of the internet. So every app in our space requires money to use, and when a user uses the app, he leaves some money there. So now that we built a gigantic index and like we're able to sort of like show your portfolio in one place where you can sort of go see all your money across like all these different apps and blockchains. Now that we sort of built this general purpose index and the algorithm to figure it out, that product seems to have like a ton of retention and like a lot of product market fit. So again, that's another thing that we're like doubling front and center. Like today you land on our app, we show you what's trending, which is where the party is at, like where is crypto people, like what are they doing, what are the new apps, what are they doing today. And then you also see like what's your portfolio, what's moving and what's happening in your portfolio. We are actually going on the mobile app. You should try the mobile app. So it's quite a bit different. Like we've also gone extremely mobile. That's the other learning that we sort of had, was like 80% of our users, returning users, daily active users, were mobile. And there weren't like any good sort of like mobile ways to like manage your crypto money and stuff. Most wallets are like on desktop. So portfolio is another sort of front and center piece on the product, and we're going like very, very, very deep there on the portfolio side. What I mean by that is like we understand that new Web3 apps are actually coming up with their own wallets, and like you actually deposit your money to like use the wallet. You use the sort of Web3 app like Polymarket or Hyperliquid, for example. So we automatically sort of like look in and like extract out your assets from these embedded wallets. So we're able to sort of, you just showed a chain graph of like your wallets, right? So we're able to like bundle these things together so that we're actually able to track the user's money across these apps. Which if you think about it, is like should be like a fundamental purpose of a wallet, right? You don't want a wallet where each time you sort of buy something, you lose it. you know but that's exactly the way crypto is today. You go sort of buy something in a new chain, and like you have to remember to go back to that chain, or you have to remember to go back to that app. So we're going very deep and like extracting the assets inside of the apps. And we're also building LLM adapters to both read and write into these apps. The beautiful thing is like, crypto is open source. Blockchains are like totally simulatable databases. So, and LLMs have gotten really good at interacting with like open APIs, specifically generating code to interact with these open APIs. So today I could tell an LLM, hey, look, this particular protocol is trending, man. Can you figure out how much of the user's money is inside this? These are the sort of transactions the user has done. These are the transactions the user's friend has done. Can you tell me if all these people are like claiming the eigenlayer airdrop? This is my user, and these are the transaction function calls with the parameters. This is my user. Can my user also claim some airdrop? If I just like take these examples from the past and give it to like an LLM, it is really good at like producing code. And like the thing about blockchains is like you can actually run the code. You have this open simulator, right? So you can actually run the code and see what token transfers result from it, what state changes result from it. And if and only if the state changes are like what you want, you show a preview to the user and the user can boom, do it. We want to show this claim button inside of 0xP app. I'll show you like, hey, eigenlayer is trending. 10 of your friends are like claiming their airdrop. Boom, there is a claim button. You click on it. I'll show you a preview. This is what's going to happen. You will get this much eigen tokens. You click submit and like your transaction goes on chain and the eigen tokens show up in your wallet. Today, no other wallet even shows up your eigen tokens, even if you claim it, right? You have to go beyond the appropriate chain to like even see it. And like, wallets treat it as spam or something. So even to sort of like identify this thing is spam, this thing is not spam, and go deep into like interacting with these apps and like building something like really generalized is both, I think, the need of the hour in crypto, and the problem is only getting worse because you're going to get more blockchains and more apps and more fragmentation, and doable for the very first time because of these LLMs code gen.
So one initial question that I was actually having was, like you mentioned, right? I mean, tracking our friends' wallets and all that, because when you're actually trading a lot, you do want to keep an eye on a certain number of wallets, because I used to set up all these Telegram bots to track certain number of wallets that that were holding and claiming the airdrops, first, right? So I want to do that, and it was initially very, very difficult because I had to set up different wallets, and not a lot of wallets have that kind of UI. So there's Rabi, there's MetaMask, and for there's Phantom, like Solfire. There's so many wallets, but what you mentioned about the chain was super important, because the whole point of blockchain is to backtrack and see what the transactions were. So when I initially got my ENS, like Harshith.eth, I was able to just, using the 0x people UI, I was able to see when that ENS was transferred from a certain wallet to my wallet, right? So it just gives you an entire snapshot of your wallet age, right? So another question that I actually had was about like Farcaster, and also the cross posting feature on 0x people, right? Because right now we're able to cross post on Twitter, Lens Protocol, and Farcaster as well. So how do you see the integration of 0x people with all these social platforms as well, right? Because end of the day, we're all social creatures, and everyone in crypto, they're always posting something. They're always posting the meme. So how do you see the integrations with these social platforms evolve?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, crypto social, we have not been able to figure it out. Like, crypto has not been able to figure out social. Farcaster is like a shadow of its past. Lens is like, I don't think it's working, and 0x people, are social. We couldn't make it work yet. We could be too early. And social, obviously, is a network effects problem. We just never know when it'll fall. It's like pushing a boulder up a hill, and you don't know when it'll start rolling by itself. We just haven't, we had one big role with Farcaster. There was like a huge set of apps that came up, with Farcaster. But we are having like a pause on the trend, on the crypto social trend. We used to have like a lot of social apps, like, Farcaster Lens, Frentech was one big one. All these things produce a lot of social profiles on chain. Now, 0x people goes and indexes all this stuff, right? So we sort of understand, it is my thesis that just like internet got an identity, and this is something that Mark Anderson sort of told me when I was pitching Like a Little to him, and he led the round, obviously. And Like a Little was totally anonymous, and Mark Anderson was like, no, 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 everyone is going to put their face on the internet, like their bio on the internet, and like, and look at the data. Like, it's just already happening. It's just exponentially happening. Similarly, the same thing is happening with crypto. It started with ENS, then it's sort of took off with NFTs. You have to show it off, right? And then it continued to take off with like, Farcaster and Lens, and then Frentech. And so like we index all of this stuff, and like we are able to, that's how we are able to locate someone. Like, I do think people will use more and more social apps in crypto, because obviously, crypto apps are like extremely viral. It's a consensus building mechanism. If you're an early user and like you're able to bring in a lot of users, you disproportionately get rewarded, because you sort of made the Ponzi scheme and the self-fulfilling prophecy come true, and you get more equity in the company. So crypto is like inherently social, and company building is like a consensus building mechanism, and like social media is how consensus gets built today. So I do think, crypto and social are like extremely interlinked. The apps are able to tap into it for distribution, but they've not been able to replace X or anything. I don't know at which point it'll be like good enough that you can sort of like actually credibly sort of do crypto social. But I do think the trend is going to, the trend is very strong. Like the number of on-chain social profiles is exponentially growing. And I think, over the next decade, it will continue to exponentially grow. I think after the next decade, like maybe 10-20% of the world will have like an on-chain social profile through which I just look up Daniel and like send him money. I don't need to like figure out if this is you, Daniel, or not. And I look up Daniel and I invite him to a Web3 app. It's going to be that simple. It might be Twitter doing it. I'm convinced it'll eventually be decentralized, but the number of those profiles are just like exponentially going up. And that trend is totally true. They're not interacting with each other yet. I don't know which level of density these conversations will start to happen. Remember that even for Facebook, like, first there were profiles, and only after a certain amount of density, there was the feed. So we're not there yet. Like, we were a bit too early. It's important to be early and try if the current forces are enough to break it. We just found out that it wasn't enough. And then, we're recalibrating and focusing more on the single player mode versus the social mode.
Got it, got it. And just to dive a little deeper into this aspect, right? Before we had NFTs, it was basically like starters, right? If you had a Bored Ape, you had to show it off, right? If you had Moonbirds, you had to show it off, right? And there was also a point where Twitter even integrated NFTs natively. We could just connect with our wallet, and then they had a hexagon. So the hexagon became a meme.
Yeah.
And after that, we had like Farcaster. Even Instagram did it at a certain point, but then they stopped it. But now again, I see this trend of, I think Twitter just launched a new feature where you can trade handles. So I think that could again bring some kind of that status back in, because I would just want Harshith, right? I mean, that's why I got a Harshith.com domain. I just got a Harshith.eth domain. So that, like you mentioned on the digital real estate, that matters to certain regions. And now, like, I'm in San Francisco, just here with Daniel, the entire JustPaid team. It's super amazing, just to experience San Francisco as well. But I think my next question would actually be about any differences that you've seen in the tech ecosystem back in Bangalore and San Francisco. What are your thoughts there? And maybe you could even share some pointers to Daniel as well, why they call Bangalore, the Silicon Valley of India. Would love to hear your thoughts there.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like Silicon Valley is very special, man. I'm not going to mince words. Like, there is no other place. Like, there is literally no other sort of place in the world where we could have been as successful as we were in the Valley. And like Bangalore doesn't come even close, right? That continues to be true even today. And, Silicon Valley has its problems. Like taking the big zoom out, right? Like the big zoom out is like, look, humans as a society, like what is our job? Our job, the story of humanity is actually a story of technology. Our job is to invent new technologies, and that's how we progressed all along. And the invention of new technology is a risky, messy process. And you need like a lot of people taking different risks, forming their own contrarian opinions and like pursuing the truth. And it only takes one person to invent the fire for the entire humanity to get fire. So, it is about risk maximization, and it's not really risk at all, right? So the farmers of like yesteryears would think that everyone should be like pursuing technologies that would better humanity. And yet you see the data, they're all, the farmers, if they came in a time machine, they would actually be surprised that like, a tiny fraction of us go and pursue, pushing frontier technologies, which is actually quite surprising. And it turns out like we are still extremely wired to pay attention to social status, and like whether your status is trending up or down in a linear manner. We sort of perceive, the movements in your social status or the threat of loss of social status exactly the same way neurologically as a lion, like the threat of a lion chasing us. So, even though we don't die by lions hunting us anymore, we sort of prevent ourselves from taking risks of advancing technology because of this sort of social status lion that could hunt us. Now, Silicon Valley is a unique place in the world. It's almost like the only place in the world, I would say, where your social status is actually defined. Every place like defines what they value in the social status. In Chennai, where I'm from, people sort of define it by, do you know this celebrity or like that celebrity in the Tamil movie industry, right? Or in Mumbai, it might be like Hindi movie industry, right? Like, every place in Delhi, it's like, do you know that, like how connected to the government you're in, like, position of power or whatever, right? So every place has like, a sorting function for social status. And Silicon Valley, as far as I know, is like the only place where like the society truly sorts by what is the most ambitious thing you're going after. That is basically the sorting function in Silicon Valley. The thing is, humans are humans. They respond to the status function, but they still sort of respond to it incrementally. They're like, oh, okay, he's a seed stage startup founder. He's like a Series A stage startup. They want as quickly as possible to go from, being like a random founder to like a seed stage founder, and then to a Series A founder. And like, at seed stage, they think of like, okay, what do I need to do to get to the Series A stage, right? Like, so, the status function is great. It's the only place which has the status function, by the way. And that has produced basically, like I read a study, basically half the world GDP growth actually came from a 30 square mile area called Silicon Valley. Basically, all growth in the world comes from technological progress. And like literally half of the US GDP growth is produced from this like 30-mile area. And like you can see right now, maybe 20% of the index is like literally Silicon Valley sort of fangs or whatever they call it, right? Like, they were all sort of produced in that small area. And that is the area where the consensus building mechanism, which we spoke about, which has moved to crypto, ran the tightest. Everyone is willing to believe. To start change, you need people willing to believe. And like everyone in Silicon Valley is willing to believe. That employee is willing to take a 50% pay cut to join my unproven startup. That investor is willing to hand out this random guy who just came to town like millions of dollars. Like, in which part of society? Like, I just came, dude, like, he didn't see my birth certificate. I didn't show him my ID or passport, man. That doesn't happen anywhere else, So it is the only place in the world where like that's the social sorting function. People respond to it. Its downsides, obviously, are people still respond to it in a linear manner. Just like how people join a Google and like get like promotions one after the other, which we complain about, and like they don't push the technological frontier forward. Even in Silicon Valley, like people respond to these incentive curves and often end up not pushing the technological frontiers forward. They think too incrementally still. Even the place where it's just full of disruptors and disruption is what you're given social status on, people respond extremely incrementally. People think about looking good all the time. So that you sort of like in the next 18 months get your next round of funding infusion. But then still it's special, man. It like even with its flaws, it has created all the wealth in the world. And now comparing to Bangalore, there is a mini sort of Silicon Valley showing up. People are now willing to sort of start taking pay cuts to join startups and stuff. People are starting to get rich. They understand the value of equity. Obviously, it's like much further behind from Silicon Valley, like orders of magnitude behind, right? I've been an angel investor, and a lot of my successful investments in India have often been from people who've like worked in Silicon Valley startups, and they can't like start a company there, and like they've started it here, and they've gone on to become extremely successful. I also think crypto is the first credible competition to Silicon Valley.
That's a bold statement. Yeah, that's a bold statement. Yeah, keep going. Sorry.
Yeah, it is the most optimistic, Silicon Valley's biggest edge is like it is the most optimistic capital markets anywhere in the world, which is willing to believe on these wild ideas and like, experiments to change the world. And who can be crazier than that? It turns out like a group of nerds who bet early on Bitcoin, and like, they were willing to believe when it was nothing, and they bet early on like Ethereum and all these things about changing the world, and they got rich, and they're like paper money rich. So it's like roulette money for them. They're like trained to believe in this stuff by getting rewarded more and more and more of their wealth in this new paper money, internet money called crypto. And like, they're willing to believe, man. And the users are optimistic to try out new products, because they literally get rich if they're early and right. Like this is the only space, in my life. I've been building internet companies for a while, and the cost of customer acquisition has been like dropping for a while. And in fact, rippling became possible because the internet drove the CAC down to acquire enterprises and stuff. And Palantir became possible because of similar reasons, like the CAC to acquire even the government started like dropping. I've never seen a negative CAC in my life before crypto. Crypto is like first truly negative CAC. People just get equity, and like they're willing to sort of come try out your product. And in fact, your early users are willing to try out your product because they'll get a bunch of equity in your company. If they're right and like they spread the word, then they actually get extremely rich. They become millionaires. From an ecosystem perspective, like investors, speculators, users, early adopters, crypto is sort of like a credible competition to Silicon Valley, where they're willing to even believe in the Ponzi scheme earlier than the Valley. They're willing to like grow the Ponzi schemes and come to consensus on them faster than the Valley at the speed of the internet and speed of light.
There's actually one point, Daniel and I keep discussing about, when it comes to crypto. Actually, I would mention it as, accountability, right? Because in San Francisco, when someone writes a check for you, there's a name, there's a company, there's an LLC. But if it's just crypto, I could just create a couple of fake wallets and then, just create a DAO and then have another Ponzi-nomics, just, create allocation in such a way where it just rewards the person who is holding the most amount of the token, right? I mean, there are like really good examples of tokens. Like Uniswap is one of the best DAOs as well, right? Aave is doing great, Eigenlayer as well. So there are really good examples of what we can see too. But like, what are your thoughts on this also, like when it comes to crypto, right? So would love to hear.
Look, I think, in fact, Uniswap is actually one of the worst examples in crypto, right? Like Uniswap is the company that woke me up to understand, okay, there is a new way of building companies, and this is the future. And Uniswap showed it's one of the most successful first big DAOs, right, out there. And it actually became as successful as Ethereum. Like, it's the first time an app becomes as successful as the chain itself. I believe the DAO sort of made as much money or like more money or like had a bigger treasury than Ethereum Foundation itself, which is like very fascinating. For the first time I saw the rise of apps. It was the first massively successful Web3 app. Now, what has happened is like, I would probably even call it like theft from the shareholders. They added like a front end fee which goes to the labs and not the shareholders. Like who approved that? I thought when I was buying Uniswap, like I was buying the shareholding of that thing. But it turned, they're saying you bought the shareholding of the back end, not the front end. I still own the front end. If you were like a public SEC regulated company, you can never do that, right? There has been like more outright thefts than that. I was also old enough to see the internet thefts and the .com thefts and the 1999 thefts, and the SEC was around, and like, people were doing a lot of this stuff. Any frontier technology like leads to like ton of speculation. And any sort of capital markets product especially leads to like ton of speculation. And crypto is the capital markets product, right? And speculation is the product, right? So it just like attracts a lot of bad actors. And like, we're still so early that the rules and the norms are not set yet. Like right now, Uniswap is like valued at a fraction of its peak. So maybe the next guy learned from it. And like maybe they won't do it, or maybe they'll do it. Maybe they learn, okay, maybe I shouldn't even launch a token. Like that's the wrong thing to learn if that's what the capital markets are teaching. But it is so early and it is so evolving. One of my heroes I've read about is like, Warren Buffett, his mentor, Ben Graham. I am an investor and like I also read a lot about other investors. There was this time, like one of the themes of the book and like, the times that they were living in was when, companies just like never paid back money to shareholders. Like it would be like a family owned company. They'll go public and they'll run it like it's their company. They'll take like outrageous compensation. They would never sort of like give money back to shareholders, and they were valued like shit, right? And it's like Warren Buffett and Ben Graham who just believed that like, no, they're, eventually they'll give the money back. Eventually the valuation will sort of fix itself. And they turned out to be right. Ben Graham's like, strategy was to buy companies below cash on their book. These days, like there are not a lot of companies, like maybe one company or something that trades below cash on its books. But like back then, there were a ton of them. And like, they were willing to sort of believe that these things will turn around and like that norms will evolve. So they were before these memes called price to earnings ratios and all these memes where everyone sort of agrees on how to value things emerged. And like that is where the opportunity is in crypto right now. In fact, like Warren Buffett, because of that opportunity, he became the richest man in the world, right? And my own friend who's like, Metacoin, he sort of like converted $10,000 to like $1 billion, right? Because these memes haven't sort of evolved and it's still very, very early days.
And Metacoin, again, I remember the $69 million NFT. So that was Metacoin who bought it. Yeah, that was a pretty cool story.
I always would equate it to ARPANET. ARPANET was the very first internet and it just changed into the internet, but it took a lot of years to get it there. I'm like, we're in the ARPANET phase of crypto, which there'll be some mega billionaires, like trillionaire companies, and then there'll be a lot of dead bodies. Like people trying to build valuable stuff in this like crazy environment. It's the wild, wild west. Honestly, it's like the wild, wild west of like the early days of the internet, like happening again.
And I'm hoping I could build a picks and shovel business here, like a Google, I'm hoping, let 1 million apps come out, let 1 million chains come out. What is going to be common and constant is like users are going to have money in these apps. Users are going to want to like transact with them and users are going to want to discover them. Like if I can build the best product for that and like, capture this tiny, small, but fast growing market, as this whole market grows, I'm hoping, we could become like the Google of the space.
What would you say the most bright lights are in crypto right now? What are you more excited about than anything in crypto? Is it the social aspect? Is it like one new technology? Is there something we don't know about or we do know about? Like,
so in crypto, every bull run slaps me in the face. And it teaches you something extremely profound. The first bull run was the idea that like when you believe in Bitcoin, you sort of start to believe that money is just meaningless. What do you mean Bitcoin? Where does its value come from? And then you sort of end up with actually USD's value doesn't come from anywhere. Oh, okay, I get it. It's like a big slap in the face, like every sort of bull run, right? And the previous bull run, which Metacoin again, like, Metacoin has caught a bunch of bull runs, and like the previous bull run, which is something that even if I told you, you wouldn't believe it, kind of, often like bull runs are like that. And he told me even before the bull run, during the bear market, that he's extremely excited about NFTs. And that is going to be huge. And that was the theme of the last bull run. There was a big sort of NFT theme in the bull run. And I really hate to say it, and it's ridiculous to even say it, but the theme of this bull run is actually meme coins. Like we'll have profound explanations for all of this later. Like it's a learning in progress, but it looks like from the data, and I see a lot of data because we have a gigantic index, right? The theme of this bull run seems to be like, meme coins. It's ridiculous. I don't see a point of it. Even NFTs, like, what utilities have the NFTs sort of come up with? Maybe it's like maybe sort of real estate will be tokenized and it'll be NFTs, I guess. We haven't seen that yet. But I did buy a couple of NFTs actually. It's like this NFT called Zohouse. It's a crypto hostel where you can sort of go out to like different places and stay with like a crypto community if you have that NFT. It's kind of like Airbnb, crypto stay, community, crypto, all of that thing put together, which I thought was cool. Like we go meet some users of 0x people there and like we sort of learn a lot being in that community. But it's still like I'm hardly an NFT user, right? But there are parts of crypto that are clearly working. For example, like the things that I do enjoy, which I more relate to as an engineer, is like transactions per second is not a problem anymore. It's totally gone. Infra has like scaled quite a bit from the last bull run. I really like that in this bull run, value is getting created on the app layer. This getting harder and harder to launch new blockchains anymore. So it's more like apps launching its own blockchain, which kind of makes sense to me. That we would have like plenty of blockchains and apps will have their own blockchains and they would sort of transact to use bridges to like talk to each other like APIs. So that is happening that I'm really excited about. Prediction markets have finally worked. When Vitalik sort of started Ethereum in like 2012, I believe, in his white paper, people asked him, what's the use of this programmable blockchain? And, one of the uses he writes about is like prediction markets. As a capitalist fanatic, I believed in prediction markets long, long time ago. And, it has been 5 times harder than making Airbnb work. Prediction markets have finally broken mainstream now. And like there are multiple prediction markets on chain, which are worth like 10, 20 billion and stuff. It has finally sort of broken through. Decentralized infrastructure might have just broken through. I hear Helium is really working great in San Francisco, wherein it's the cheapest and the fastest internet, wherein like a group of people who are running their own internet nodes are able to like supply internet. But I'm like bummed, man, because I think they're doomed to fail because like on the other side is Elon Musk throwing objects in space and like calling like satellite internet. So he's like single-handedly managed to centralize the internet again. I also sort of like read about this crypto app which has given cameras to all the Uber drivers and like they're collecting like a lot of map data. I'm hearing like that is now starting to like generate enough revenues to be self-sustaining the token emissions. I'm not sure about that, but it looks like that is starting to break. So decentralized physical infrastructure is another sort of thing that it might still be too early, but it's so hard to do and it might start to work. If not this bull run, the next one.
You threw a lot at us. I'm like processing it all.
But meme coin seems to be king, man. The biggest winner in a bull market is always the one which has the insider outsider syndrome, wherein enough of the insiders should be like extremely skeptical of it. It should be like nonsense. It makes no sense to me, but like the numbers are clearly telling me that's the theme of this bull market. I was stupid enough to like not know it on the NFTs the first time around, and like even when NFTs came out, I at least like recognize repetition that this is what I told about NFTs when they came out, right? The second part of it is also like it is mostly useful to the insiders only, people who like have a bunch of crypto but don't have any fiat. They're like playing with something, they're like speculating, they're making a joke. It's an expensive joke.
I mean, it reminds me of I joined District. That's a Silicon Valley based startup that you buy crypto and then you get access to this community. As that community grows, the crypto becomes more valuable. You get this like token that's usable for like events and stuff like that. So it is becoming a reality in Silicon Valley also, like it's just happening all over here. I mean, startups like are risk machines and there's different type of risk. I noticed a theme in your life, which was you did a social startup, hyper social like startup, and then you went into B2B. That's where I kind of stick is I'm in like B2B companies. And then you went back into like consensus social, almost like a same kind of startup. Is a B2B less risky or is it more risky or is it the same risk across the board? Like now that you've done a variation of startups, like what's the most risky thing a founder could do? What's the least risky?
I think, slightly zooming out a bit, right? Like there are differences between the markets, but I wouldn't call it like risk differences because oftentimes markets are somewhat efficient. You get enough competition that on one hand, the risk might be the market might not exist. The other hand, the risk might be like you might not be the winner in the market. There is like plenty of competition who's taken the low hanging fruits. The noise is the risk. There are always two sides of the risk. So the markets are just different in balance of risks. For example, let's take many different dimensions, right? You could be like really early into like a frontier market and then you have a market risk, but you have like no competition risk. Or you could be like building like an AI agent thing and then your risk is more like competition risk and you don't have market risk. Like everyone in the market is like growing and like getting a bunch of revenue and you have a noise risk. Like everyone is making bold and wild claims and like you launch and like no one cares, right? So you have a noise risk, right? Again, let's talk about enterprise versus consumer. In enterprise, you have higher sort of predictability and continuity of growth rates. Like Rippling can project out its like revenues for the next 4 years. And it like more or less works out. On the other hand, on consumers, you have fast growth rates. much faster growth rates. If Rippling were a consumer startup, it would sort of like the 4 years of growth would actually occur in a few months, which is more risky. Like, yeah, in the 4 years, you'll probably have plenty of competition as well. And like on the other hand, here, like, a new competitor can come and like make you like irrelevant as well, right? It's just like differences in market. And why is that? Like, it's different because in enterprise, for me to convince a HR person to buy Rippling, he's a conservative guy, he's not a risk taker, he's not an early adopter. He needs social proof for him to work. If Founders Fund invests in Rippling, he'd be like, oh, I guess I can't get fired for buying a Founders Fund portfolio company. You know, if his
Yeah.
friends buy Rippling and tell him about it, then he's like, yeah, more likely to buy. He'll only buy it during renewal times. He's not going to like, drop out of Stanford to start a company. He's not the guy who's doing that, right? So he's like going to wait for his renewal to renew it. So if I miss him, if I don't convert him this year, I need to hit him up next year, right? And then by next year, maybe two of his friends have spoken about Rippling. He calls his friends and like, oh, now I am at Rippling, and like he'll convert. That produces slower and more predictable growth rates. Whereas in crypto, like, I'm like, I guess I use this first. If not, like, someone else will get rich and like, I'll be a late user, right? Like, let me sort of get more equity in this new company, right? Like, I just see startup risk very differently from like these dimensions. The true risk for a startup, in my opinion, is you don't have enough of an edge and like you're not working on enough of like frontier pushing stuff that you're uniquely suited to work on. I think like that's kind of like what YC has also like learned to sort of like teach us a little bit, is to like look inside as much as you look outside. Like look at what your edges are. What set of life experiences do you have that gives you like unique perspectives on the world that like perhaps is not consensus, like that you uniquely are suitable to do based on your skill sets. Some of it is like Peter Thiel, and some of it is like YC also. Like, a good part of the YC application is like asking, why are you suited? Like, what do you understand that nobody else understands? Why are you uniquely suited to do this? There is a big part of that. Like, that's what produces risk. The risk is just like not being unique and like not sort of pushing the frontier like big enough.
Like, I spoke to a few people that are like trying to get to Mars. And I'm like, that risk is so high for me. And I'm like, what's the value? Why would I do that? And it's a noble cause, and it's like, intergalactic travel. Like, people want to put hotels on other planets. I was talking to people about that this week. I'm like, the risk is high in that. Like, my gut tells me rate of failure is so high. Would I take that bet? I'm always like managing my own personal risk levels. And I'm like, what are those risks? Like, I guess you ride that line, but you also have like a limit.
Absolutely. That's why it's as much self-exploration as the exploration of the world. Elon didn't like yesterday wake up and say like, I'm going to go to Mars, right? You and I, like, we're here because we had like incremental feedback that we are in the right direction. And like we took longer and longer time horizon deferred gratification. And I am continually learning to take even longer time horizon deferred gratification. 0x people is like a very long time horizon, like deferred gratification. We are building things that like no one in the space is like willing to build. It's not really a fundable company. More recently, I'm working on something like a new project that I'm sort of building on, which is like even more deferred gratification, right? Like, it's like huge if true. But like that's what Sama learned from Elon, and I'm trying to kind of like learn from some. It's as much like a self journey as it is from our experiences. And over time, that's the North Star, is to be able to sort of take even larger time frame deferred gratification. You kind of like have this like aha moment at one point where you kind of realize that the best nonprofits are actually the best capitalistic money printing enterprises, and the best sort of capitalistic money printing enterprises are actually the best nonprofits. They kind of like converge at the top. Sama saying like, dude, I already have the money. Like, I don't need a equity stake in like OpenAI. Let's just make this thing happen. At some point, after you've made enough wealth, you kind of like need to figure out like how to destroy it, what is worth burning on. And if you burn it correctly, then it sort of like comes back 100-fold. But your objective is still to like try to burn it.
And you think Sama did that? Like, he went all in on OpenAI, even though he's like, this, I don't have any equity in this at first.
Yeah, and he burned his money, right? When he did OpenAI, I spoke to him. I think his net worth was like perhaps like 100 mil, and he put 10 mil in OpenAI. Look, you and I know plenty of founders with like 100 mil net worth. Like, tell me who put 10 mil into even their next startup. He was like sort of pushing it even there. He's like, how much money do I need? He's able to put all his money in his costs. And it turns out the world is in such a way that if you burn it correctly, like you create so much value for the world that it sort of comes back and the world begs you to allocate that higher amount of value.
If you have the capital, take long bets. And a long bet is like, when you're saying that, I'm thinking like 20, 30, 40, 50 years.
I think it's more that there is a hill that's like really far away. The upside of that hill is like really big if true, but the natural hill climbing mechanism of like capitalism is actually too short term oriented to even explore that hill. And then, it might seem risky, but ironically, like because no one else is exploring it, and oftentimes an exponent will inevitably lead to that hill too. And if you ask Sama, like back then in this OpenAI, he would tell me like, believe in the exponent, stupid. Look, man, like compute is like growing at this exponential phase. And if you throw intelligence, like seems to scale linearly with compute, and he had like plenty of data points, and like, what's going to happen if you just completely believe in this exponent, right? Like, believe in the exponent, stupid. If you asked Elon and Tesla, it's like, look, battery prices are crashing this much. Gasoline is like almost a constant. If this just trend continues, like what's going to happen? At some point, it's also like, believe in the exponent, stupid. But yeah, some of the bets are like much longer term. But, there is always an exception. I just don't know what is the exponent with Elon. With SpaceX, like Elon pushes all limits. I don't see an exponent there at all. Actually, there is like degrees of risk. One axis to measure it is like how delayed the gratification is. The other axis, of course, is like how much of a civilizational impact you create if you're right. And then the other axis, like an entrepreneur, is like pain axis. It starts off with like, okay, you don't have any money. You're just staking your time to like be successful, which is where we were all. And then you're successful enough that you put a bunch of your money to work for an eventual profit, which many of us do. I invested in 0x People, or like Parker invested in Rippling. Above that is like, you put money in, it is purely to burn, it's a non-profit, right? Like that's like Sama's level. And then beyond that is like, put like your entire net worth in, and like you see no scope of any returns. I'm not there yet, but I'm like growing up to sort of become more like Sama, where I can put like a decent portion of my net worth without expecting returns.
We were in the batch where Sam Altman was advising us. Like, did he ever give you any advice? And your startup, what did you see in him that was abnormal? Like, I guess, or what advice did he give you? You're giving a lot of it, but it's like, did you see glimmers of who he became back then, or no?
No, I did not. Not in the beginning. So when I first interacted with Sama, he was a previous batch YC founder, right? Like, I was like a little, and like he was a hottest startup of his batch, Looped. I was the hottest startup of my batch, like a little. And I'm like jealous that like PG describes Sama as like one of the top 5 founders he's ever met. And, PG sort of rejected me 3 times before I got into YC. So I'm like, what the fuck does he see in Sama that he doesn't see in me, right? And like Looped failed. And like his description as a salesman and a deal maker doesn't sit well with an engineer. I sort of think lower of that particular pitch. So I started off with negative bias purely from a competition/jealousy perspective, right? And then over time, as the startup world humbles you, you sort of like grow up quite a bit. And then next time I met Sama was when I was trying to sell off some of secondary in my like little or something. He was thoughtful about like how he would do it, how I could go about it and stuff. He was smart and like knowledgeable about that stuff. And then like that's when I sort of learned about his angel investments, which were doing extremely well. I don't know of a better angel investor than Sama, to be honest with you. I was like marveled at it. I also understood YC is like a fountain of wealth, and he's like sitting in the front and like drinking from it. But even then, it was not a full index. Portion of the index he was picking from was like very successful, and he went all in, which was also like extremely mind blowing to me. His grandma died, and like he got $1 million of inheritance, and he put it in 40 YC startups. Like, 8 per batch over 5 years systematically, 25K per startup. His track record is like incredible. That 1 million became 100 million or more actually. Which was like mind blowing. So I was pretty impressed by that point for 2 reasons. One is the picking was really good. 2 is who decides, okay, I got $1 million. Like he's like an 18-year-old kid or 19-year-old kid. Like, I got $1 million, like over the next 5 years, it's all into startups. Who does that, man? I was already marveling at that like risk appetite, the bet and the conviction he had on himself. And then over time, I learned a lot from him. Over time, as I've interacted, I've always like come off thinking he's playing a different game. He's outside the matrix. I thought I was outside the matrix. I was playing a different game. And like there are levels to this.
I guess I had never analyzed Sam Altman that much. I'm always like, I just see his success. It just keeps getting more and more successful by the week. I'm like, there is so much going on in his life now. It's insane. For me, I was all in on just my company. Like he was kind of spreading it around, which de-risked him a lot, which is, it's really smart. But like, how do you pick the right companies? It's so hard. It's hard to know who's going to be a billion-dollar company. Maybe it's not for him. He sees the founders, he gets it, he like immediately has conviction. I don't know. I'm more of an entrepreneur than an investor. I think he's an investor and an entrepreneur in one. Like he's like a, more of both.
At the time when I spoke to him, he told me maybe I'm more of an investor than an entrepreneur. And even when he was running OpenAI, he told me maybe I'm more of an investor than an entrepreneur. And in fact, I think it's in one of his blogs even.
Okay, so that he uses that skill in his founder life to build and then invest in people. Why not come back to Silicon Valley? Are you done? It's too crazy here. Like, why? I'm still here and I'm like, it's very risk on focused, like lots of entrepreneurs. It is nice outside of Silicon Valley. I'm not gonna lie. It's like a different world. It's really like a fresh air. I'm always in the thick of it here, like working nonstop. For me, I was always questioning, should I leave Silicon Valley? Like, you did it. Like, why?
So I have a love-hate relationship with Silicon Valley. Each time I live in Silicon Valley, I just want to run away and leave the place, because of the incrementalism and the pretend and the games we play with each other to show how well we are doing. Everyone talks about the same thing at the same time, reads the same thing at the same time. Everyone has read the hacker news and sort of groupthink amongst the people who are supposed to disrupt. On the other hand, it is the place where people do a lot of things. High momentum companies get built where you compress extraordinary talent density into like a small area, which is really incredible. On the other hand, I also learned from YC to focus on, look internally, focus on my strengths and like double down and triple down on that and like do what comes extremely natural to me. I'm kind of like really exploring whether I can sort of like build a very low momentum, almost like a zombie startup wherein like, look, can I be early in a small but fast growing market, be underrated for a long time, no one is willing to invest in it, the momentum doesn't come like all at once. You're able to hire like really good engineers, but like they're not really entrepreneurs. They're not thinking business, that they're like asking, well, where is the metrics this quarter? Are we going up and to the right? Where you always need to look good and you always need to appear good, where you're benchmarked against the hottest companies ever. I've always like played to my India advantage. Like, 15 years of founding companies, I've always had like large engineering teams in India. And what if I double down on that?
I guess your startup is fully in India, your new company.
Yeah,
Okay.
we're in office, one office in Bangalore in person. I'm the only remote guy. I spend like a week, a month in the Bangalore office where I'm like fully in startup mode. The rest of the day is like every day I sort of wake up and spend 10 minutes with every engineer in the team and like trying to solve the hardest problem that we can and like trying to push up the ambition level. And then when I'm actually spending that week, a month, I'm like working really hard from day to night.
Nice. That's a really good working style. You won't burn out if you don't overdo it. You overdo it, you burn out, you're like useless to the startup. I don't know. There's always this like give and take. You don't want to burn out.
Does need like, people like working really hard and like thinking about it day and night and people sort of pushing each other's ambition levels. And the office needs to have that culture. And it really helps that like whenever I'm like willing to fully embrace that culture, like I spend that time in the office and I don't dilute the culture or something.
Do you think startups are zero sum or positive sum? Because in crypto, I think there's always a certain point where things do become a zero sum. But from larger perspective, what do you think? Because we are in startups because we are optimists, right? Just a couple pointers, and just wanted to from your end.
Like Paul Graham puts it, startups are actually the only source in the world of any positive sum at all. Every other part of the world is actually entirely zero sum. If there is like one positive sum part of the world, it's actually startups. And like literally, we just discussed the sort of root cause of the positive sum is like we create entirely brand new Ponzi schemes. The wealth and the stuff, the equity value came out of nothing, like literally out of thin air. Like if everyone believes that you're going to use a mobile app and like press a button and then it sort of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy and it becomes a much more efficient world, it didn't really take out of anyone. In fact, there is this like joke that Uber's market cap is actually like probably 100 times the total taxi company market cap. Like that literally proves that it was not zero sum at all. Uber didn't sort of become what it is by destroying the taxi cabs and medallions, which is part of it is true, which is what people like to focus on. But like they sort of conveniently forget the other 98 billion that got created out of nowhere. There's a completely new market of people who would have never sort of called a cab. They call an Uber. So it is the only source of positive sum in the world. And, my beef with Silicon Valley is like two, like, one is it is actually the only source of positive sum in the world. And it is like really good at allocating capital, like the best in the world. And its internal misallocations are due to zero sum games it plays. Still, right? Like there are still like a million B2B SaaS companies. When Rippling started B2B SaaS, it was not like a common term at all, actually. You kind of have to build your thing and make your predictions before it becomes like a category. And like Peter Thiel calls, then it's too late. Then the zero sum players start coming in and like they perceive really low risk. And then that's when it's actually extremely risky. It's just too late. And then like as Sikveya Roloff calls it, like risk without return. You made this like remarkable comment where it's like risk without return, right? The transition happens when people sort of like compete on a crowded market trying to get a little bit of an edge. The nice thing is like Dr. Chrono is like one example of companies that I sort of quote, which is it is an extremely incremental company. It was not the first ERP, or it was not 100x better than anything. It was an incremental company. And internet itself being a growth market, they kept finding a 2x here, a 3x there, like a way to grow 2x this year. There was some arbitrage or the other that kept throwing up because the markets were so large. And because of the positive sum nature of the markets itself, of the internet itself, they were able to grow a lot and they were able to get very wealthy doing that. Now it is like zero sum in the sense that like the market exists, someone else would have taken it if you didn't do it. Like this sort of cornering a niche helped them, but it's not clear that the market would have sort of had that niche. But then it's like positive sum in the sense that the whole market is growing, the ground underneath them is growing. They are consistently able to find niches where like they're underserved and they're able to go and use that as a distribution mechanism to keep eating more and more and like growing in this sort of survival of the fittest sort of life form. And like ultimately, produce gigantic successes because the market itself was positive sum and like growing really fast. Now, there are two parts to this, right? Believe in the exponent stupid. Like as Sama says, behind every great success is like an underrated exponential graph, including OpenAI and including Tesla, with the exception of SpaceX, which is one of the only living legends who are like completely unmatched. Everything else has like an exponential graph where it's literally that's the definition of a positive sum. A whole new market is being created, right? And then you sort of intersect that with the opposite of competition, which is if you didn't build it, this company would not exist or it wouldn't exist for a long time, which Tesla would qualify for, OpenAI would qualify for. I would even argue Rippling would qualify for. If we didn't build it, we would not have like a unified system which worked together for a long, long time. Nobody else was going to do it. Actually, Rippling still does not have any competition. We don't. We have like vertical competitors who just do payroll or something, but we still don't have any competition today. Our payback periods and gross margins are like unmatched in SaaS still. Like it's been a long time since we started Rippling. It's going to be 10 years now. We still don't have any credible competition, So it is the kind of company where like if you don't build it, like no one would actually build it. As you sort of like be more and more into this like startup space, like you kind of realize that's your job for which you get paid for, is to like really push the frontier, find things that you're uniquely qualified to build. Your shape matches a particular hole in the universe, you know, rather than any startup formulas of like patterns that has worked in the past, which is the most common mistake that Silicon Valley repeats.
I mean, that's super insightful. It's just finding who you are as a person and where your skill sets fit. And it's hard to be self-reflective enough to know what that is. But some of the best founders know what that is and they like run with it. Like Steve Jobs, like he was just great at designing like personal computers, whether it be the iPhone or like the Mac. If he was doing like SpaceX, he might fail gloriously really fast. I don't think he could build it. Or maybe he could. I don't know. He might want to make it look too pretty and it's not practical to like actually get into space.
So maybe I can sort of like end with sharing one thing that I'm like trying and pushing my limits on. Again, I have no idea what I'm doing. One of the most underrated trends, now it has gotten like a lot more understood. Obviously, cost of energy is falling after a long time. Cost of solar is going through like an exponential sort of decline. Future of energy is solar, and it has already become the cheapest source of energy, and therefore the price exponential declines are like overflowing into the energy costs. Therefore, the world GDP is just like energy, right? How much per capita energy we consume is how wealthy we are. It's just like a one-on-one tight correlation. And one of the things that's happening there is we buy like the proliferation of solar panels is we sort of buy and place it in our residential spots where the land is very expensive. Most of the world is like empty and humans sort of congregate into high density places, which is really productive for our economy. Which is a good idea for our economy. But then it's not great for like residential rooftop solar, which is what has sort of gotten product market fit first, whose deployment is what is producing these curves. And then therefore there has been a huge focus of area efficiency, like, how much of the sunlight that falls on you can you like convert into energy and stuff. What I was like looking at is like, what I'm like very curious about and spending energy on is like, look, there are parts of the Kalahari desert, like lands really far away, like deserts in Kalahari, which is very, very, very cheap. Actually, like for $1 million, I could buy San Francisco in the Kalahari desert, and like $1 billion per year of energy falls on it. Is there a way to like harvest it? But if you buy solar panels, it'll cost like it'll cost like tens of billions of dollars to like lay on top of it. So it's not that dissimilar to the Mars or the Moon problem, where you go there, you can't like possibly ship it. So you have to like do some self manufacture or find some system that can self replicate to get that area. And it turns out like most of the solar panels mass is actually glass. And like most of the energy that goes into manufacturing a solar panel is actually glass, goes into manufacture of glass. So there's a natural question. If you want to like do this in a closed system, there's a natural question of how do you manufacture glass, right? And then it turns out solar energy is like inefficient because it takes a couple of hops. It starts off with DC and then you need to make it into AC. And then eventually you consume it as heat. At the end of the day, most of the consumption is heat in factories and stuff. So it goes through like a huge energy loss gradient as you convert it. And it turns out like back in the day, there was a competing solar technology called concentrated solar power. So you just like converting it to electrons, you just converted it to heat, and you ran steam turbines and like you sort of get electricity that way. And because of this law where you produce more of something, the price falls exponentially. So like rooftop solar won and solar panels won, because they're more modular, compact, and like have an immediate impact. And the other branch of science, we just stopped exploring it, which is the concentrated solar power, which is very interesting because you just take the heat, concentrate the sunlight, take the heat, and just do manufacturing with it, right? So what I'm working on with like a small team is like this idea that you start with like, let's say like 1,000 mirrors. You sort of point it at like a small region, like a small area, the sunlight that falls on it, and you melt the sand in that region. If you have 1,000 suns on sand, it produces a couple of thousand degrees, and sand melts at those temperatures. And then if you let it cool down, what you get is actually glass.
I'm totally following you. Yeah. So you're creating like a glass factory essentially.
And then you take the glass and you coat one side of it with like aluminum. Then what you get is a mirror. So you started with 1,000 mirror and you produced 1,001. And you ask, okay, what is the physics limit of like how quickly can the system double? How much energy, if you take all this energy and like use it entirely to melting sand and this kind of a hypothetical system, if you just from an energy perspective, the doubling time is actually just 4 days. So in 4 days, 1,000 units of mirror can produce another 1,000 units of glass, equivalent glass. That's obviously the theoretical upper limit that physics lays on you. You can't do any better than that. And then there is like practically what can you actually do? Right now, we know how to do it with a 1,000x inefficient system. Like today, we can do it. Instead of 4 days doubling, we can do it a 4,000 day doubling, which is like 10-year doubling. We know how to do it. The question is, can you sort of get one order of magnitude of efficiency improvements from 1,000 times loss, 0.1% efficiency to like 1%? Because if we can, then you're talking about like a 400 day doubling, which is like a 1 year doubling.
So the mirrors are the solar panels. You want to create a mirror factory.
Yeah. Mirrors make more mirrors. There are no more solar panels.
It absorbs the heat for that top of the house, or what is it mirror for?
No. So there is no house. So again, the contrarian bet we are taking is we are going really far away and exploring a hill that capitalism is not exploring.
Yeah.
So the sort of things that we are sort of betting against, we do energy capture really far away from residential, number one.
Yeah.
Number two, we will never transmit it. Forget about putting these wires and transmitting it to every household and stuff. Like we'll never do that. Which is why, like, people don't do it really far away. It's just the transmission costs are too high. Number three, we will not even make electricity ever. You want to eventually manufacture with heat. Most of the energy that we consume is to manufacture cement, is to manufacture like glass, is to manufacture like aluminum, like just manufacture with heat. Today we take electricity and go from DC to AC to like heat. Just go to heat.
You could have factories in the middle of nowhere with no energy source. It's just your mirrors producing heat.
It was not possible before because people needed to operate these factories, but maybe Optimus will help me, man. Maybe these robots can like operate really far away where there are no humans, you know?
Yeah, that's a crazy awesome idea, actually. And you're
know?
starting this. Are you going to buy the land, or are you just thinking about it right now? It's in the idea phase.
I'm going very, very slowly, man. Right now, what we're doing is manufacturing glass, just melting sand like a million different ways to see if we can manufacture really flat glass. Because the glass manufacturing process is sort of frozen 100 years ago. And we can't use that process for whatever reason to like do our stuff. So we're just like melting glass all the time and like trying to figure out how do we make really flat glass that can reflect the parallel rays of sunlight completely parallel without imperfections to really long distances so that you can concentrate large areas into small areas and like melt stuff.
That's a crazy awesome idea. It sounds at that as your like moonshot idea. That's the one that like, if it works, you've done something crazy.
And if it works, this is what we should be doing in Mars and Moon and around the sun. Like this is the architecture for a Dyson sphere, which was written by Dyson hundreds of years ago, of how a civilization will harvest more and more energy. And it has mirrors around the sun, rotating around the sun, reflecting to whichever planet you want or whichever part of the solar system you want to like harvest that energy. And if this works, like this is the sort of archetype for a self-doubling system, which gets us there.
Maybe there's not a lot of capital. I don't know. It might be a lot of capital, but $1 million for the land. God knows how much, like 10, $20 million for like just prototyping,
Yeah.
Easy. Like hardware is hard. You blow a lot of money and stuff may not work. So you keep trying and you keep spending money on it. I avoid hardware because it's so capital intensive. It's just going to take a lot of capital. So there's a lot of risk in that.
Absolutely. The question of how do you blow up your capital? You've got to find an answer, right? At some point you have to think about how to blow up the capital.
Yeah. Yeah. That's one way. And if it works, you've like a billion X'd it. If it doesn't work, you burned it out. And then still you've at least explored it and you like die knowing you tried something crazy. And people will remember you for that. And it's like, on your deathbed, you'll not really regret it. It's
Yeah.
you tried something crazy. So I love it. I love it. That's a great way to end the podcast. So thanks again, Prasanna.